So, Paul, thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast, Therapy for Guys, for driving all the way down from Houston here to Katy. It is really cool to see you after so many years. And I'm really excited about connecting and having this conversation with you.
Well, I'm honored. I was truly flattered and honored when you reached out. It's been a few months now since we've been trying to get together.
I know, but I'm glad we finally made it work.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I was honored. And then I started listening to your podcast when you invited me to be on here, and it's been cool, man. I really like your work. You're doing awesome stuff with this.
I appreciate that. Okay, so Paul, for the listeners, can you just provide a sketch of kind of who you are, what you're up to professionally, maybe some of your interests, and then from there we can kind of jump into this conversation around fly fishing and religion and nature and wherever else, we go with that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm a husband, 25 years now to Jen, and father of 3. We've got a 12th grader, a 9th grader, and a 4th grader. So
wow,
life is very full. And
I love that range.
Yeah, it's a good range. We've got college applications going on right now and scholarship applications. All of that is full bore, but
Are you able to say kind of where they're looking at?
Well, she's got a good list. Right now, UT is at the top of the list.
Nice.
And so we'll see where she lands. But there's a lot of great options for sure. And she has set herself up well to, get into a lot of places. So she'll have options. And
that's awesome.
It's exciting.
Does she know what she wants to pursue?
She's looking at film right now.
Oh, man. I hear UT's a great school for that.
Exactly. So she has been at the high school for the performing and visual arts downtown.
Oh, yeah.
In the theater department. And she has loved that whole storytelling world, and live theater has been awesome. But looking a little more towards film. So we'll see. I'm as interested as anybody to see where this journey takes her.
Got you. And then your youngest is in 4th grade?
Exactly.
Wow.
So yeah, 9th grader and 4th grader as well. So, and those 2 are boys. And so they are a lot of fun. And we got, I'm playing ultimate Frisbee on Saturdays with my 9th grader, which is awesome for me and for him. And then, Sam is into all kinds of stuff, soccer and a lot of stuff too. So there's a lot of action at our house, and it's a lot of fun these days.
Oh, I bet, man. Yeah, we have 4 total. We're a blended family, and we're just always going. It's crazy if we have a moment to ourselves or just a moment to just relax with work and everything. So
totally. And, today here driving out to Katy, we've had this day on the calendar for, a couple months. And I was like going to drive out here and go fishing at this spot in Katy that I've heard about that I want to fish. And then it's like, oh, wait, my son's got exams and he gets out at 11 and I'm gonna have to pick him up from school. And now when we leave here, I got to go drive something to take it to my daughter who's still at school. And it's like, the window, it just keeps getting narrower and narrower and narrower. So,
and dude, it never ends.
I'm not going to get to fish out here in Katy on this trip. But it's
man, I'm sorry to hear that. But I'm glad you're kind of like honoring your other responsibilities. Where's the place in Katy where you've heard about the good fishing?
Well, we can't burn the spot on the podcast.
Got you.
Okay, I'll set you up offline.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I'm not a spot burner, Kike.
Okay, good.
My fishing buddies who actually listen to this will appreciate that.
Okay, no, so maybe we can get into kind of the sacredness of that in a moment. So, okay, I'm glad that you kind of started by framing yourself relationally. You're a husband, you're a father. What about in terms of kind of what you do for a living? Even though I kind of struggle with that way of putting it, like your vocation, maybe.
Yeah, sure. So I get to serve as a community care pastor at Ecclesia Houston at our downtown campus.
Yeah.
And it is a really beautiful gig for me. I mean, I love it. This community, our family's been part of this church for about 20 years. And so these are my people. And I really love getting to use my gifts and serve that community. And I basically get to do this. Like I get to sit with people, and I mean, not with recording on, but I get to sit with people and just engage their stories, walk with people through crisis, whether it's, relational crises or bereavement, grief, preparation for marriage. I get to do a lot of weddings, so a few funerals. We used to do hospital visits before COVID.
Okay.
And, they don't let visitors at the hospitals as much anymore, but all of that kind of stuff. And honestly, I feel like I've got the best job in the building. Like I get to be with people all week. There's other people taking care of a lot of the administrative and even the big scale teaching opportunities. So I get to do this, and I
Yeah.
love it. And so, in many ways, I feel like I get to be myself, kind of with and for the community in ways
Mm,
that are a gift, hopefully to the community, but certainly to me as well.
wow. So in some ways, you're like with people from birth to death,
Exactly.
you
That's
know,
exactly it.
in all the various
Everything from,
stages. Yeah.
baptism, dedication, which we offer both at our church, and all the way through certainly, weddings, funerals, all of that. And again, I love it. Like
Mm,
I really love coming alongside people and journeying with them in whatever they're facing, right? For some people, it's just a mentoring kind of thing. For
sure.
others, they're wrestling with, deconstruction or disillusionment or theological questions. Or for other people, it's a question of, bereavement, grief. I find myself
Yeah.
talking about grief a lot. And so
Oh, I bet.
it's, but it's real, like we
Mm,
sit, I mean, you're a therapist, right? Like you sit
yeah.
with people, and it's such an honor when people can be vulnerable and open their hearts up and share it. I mean, I receive it as a sacred trust. People are always thanking me, and I'm like, no, thank you actually, because like this is beautiful what's happening here, and I'm just honored that you would invite me into your story in those sacred and intimate ways.
Yeah, no, that's so good. At one point when I was doing some of my early therapeutic work, I worked with a psychiatrist who, they're a little bit different in that they can prescribe medication. At this point, they don't spend that much time with the person. It's actually kind of short term, and they only have like maybe 30 minutes with them. But she would always end with, I'm so grateful for you and your time and your willingness to open yourself up in these vulnerable ways. And so I've kind of taken that on myself, just like you're saying. Every client, when I end, it's always, man, that was a gift to me. I know how hard it is to open up and be vulnerable and sort of expose yourself to another human being. So I'm proud of you, and that was amazing. So thank you.
Totally.
Yeah, I love that spirit, Paul.
And that's, it's also the avenue to their healing, right? Like the vulnerability is going to be the way to
Oh my gosh.
come against most of the things that people are dealing with. And it's when we, the shame tries to keep us isolated, keep us separate. And when we're vulnerable and we open ourselves up, that's actually where the healing happens.
Oh
So
man,
I'm
you're
telling
speaking
people
my
all the,
language. I
I
love
know.
that.
And I tell people all the time, like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, and I'm very quick to refer to mental health professionals when needed. But when it's appropriate, what I really love is like walking alongside people who also have a therapist, and I'm just
Yeah,
like part of the care team for them. But some people don't need that. Like they
sure.
need a pastor, or they need just someone to come alongside. And that's just the image that I love, that kind of biblical image of coming alongside that I try to hold.
Yeah, no, I love that. I would even say this may get a little controversial for some people in the therapy world. Not everyone can afford quality therapy.
Totally.
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to work at a practice personally where we don't take insurance, which is great for us financially, and we can have a lot of freedom in the theories and the interventions that we use. We're not bound by these huge corporations or insurance companies, and that's a real like positive. The negative is I have to turn down quite a few people that would like to work with me and other therapists at our office, and either send them to someone who takes insurance, which can sometimes not be the best. I don't want to make a blanket statement about that. I'm sure, some great therapists who take insurance, but I appreciate individuals like yourself, whether it's a pastor or like a spiritual director or just a mentor, who can provide some space and structure for someone who may not be able to go through therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned spiritual direction. I'm actually in a spiritual direction training program right now. And
Nice.
so I'm excited about that. I'm about 6 months into my program. It'll be about 2.5 years total, but it's another exciting direction that I'm heading in.
So maybe you could kind of help me understand this. I have a client who is in the Roman Catholic tradition, might be a priest one day, and he was telling me a little bit about his experience with spiritual direction in distinction from the sort of psychotherapy that we've been doing. He really values both, but I'm curious, from your understanding of therapy and then spiritual direction, what do you see as some of the differences between the two?
Well, I think spiritual, often therapy is going to be focused on our relationship either to ourself or to another person, like it's often very earthly. And I think
Sure.
spiritual direction offers an opportunity to work on our relationship with God.
Okay.
And so, or on our spirit. And so there's certainly value in both. But I think there's like, we have to be clear on what is our objective here, you know?
Yeah.
And so for me, as I move towards spiritual direction, I think of it in terms of being an invitation to sit with people in a contemplative way in order to kind of cultivate ears to hear and eyes to see, so that we can hold space and listen to the true spiritual director, which is the Holy Spirit, right? Like, I'm not the director. The real director
Yeah.
is God.
I like that.
And so we're just trying to hold space for people to have those conversations and then invite them with questions. So, I mean, as you know, spiritual direction is a lot less of me talking than it is even what I do in kind of pastoral care, right?
Sure.
Like, I feel there's a lot more give and take with pastoral care. Spiritual direction is going to be a lot more even like, what is this, you know, inviting people to listen to God. What is the Spirit telling you about that? Or as an interesting image, you're going to be curious. You're going to chase threads the same way that you would in therapy, the same way that I would in pastoral care,
Gotcha.
where you really hear what people are saying, and you pursue their desires, you pursue their heart kind of through what they're bringing to it. But it's also going to be in the context of what is God saying to your heart in the midst of that journey? Or have you listened for that voice? Have you listened to what God's saying in whatever you're wrestling with? Because often they're going to be bringing similar struggles, right?
Sure.
So,
No, okay. No, that's a helpful distinction. I appreciate you kind of unpacking that a little bit. So, okay, Paul, one of the things that I found out about you when I was doing a little bit of research was you kind of had this list out there of what some of your favorite books were through the COVID period. And I think one of the connections to our conversation today is, I know I want to get into your understanding of fly fishing and religion and nature. And one of the books that you highlighted that you really enjoyed was Mary Oliver's collection of poems entitled Thirst.
yeah.
And
I brought it with me, by the way.
oh, amazing. So I wanted to start by just asking you, of all the books you could have chosen, why that one? Maybe you could unpack some of the personal significance. And then I had a couple poems that I read this week from that collection that I wanted to just kind of read here, today on this episode, and then just give you an opportunity to kind of just reflect on what you think it means.
Sounds great.
Okay.
I'm definitely
Awesome.
a big fan of Mary Oliver.
I am too. I think she's one of my favorite poets.
For sure. For me too. And, occasionally I will write some poetry myself. And
I saw that.
It's in the, Mary Oliver would be in the kind of style of poetry that I think that I am trying to do, if that makes any sense. Like
100%.
What she does is she just goes on a walk, and she would do it like every day. I mean, she was walking outside like every day of her life, and she's just looking around and observing the world, and is encountering some really profound and deep truths.
Absolutely.
But she's accessing them through these moments that are like, she just writes about a moment, right? Like geese flying overhead or whatever it may be, just walking to the pond. And then those are the places where, in just sort of being super present to the creation, like she is encountering the divine or some deep thing within herself, or just something hilarious and profound and will make you laugh out loud. Like she's real earthy, but she's just encountering God everywhere she looks. And to me, that's just a model that I want to follow.
Oh, I love that. So what do you think she meant by the concept thirst? Because I kind of see that as a spiritual, religious, deeply human reality. And I'm just curious kind of what you think about why she would entitle this collection Thirst. And I'm going to be looking up this poem while you kind of reflect on that.
Okay, well, this particular poem, and just for some context for those who don't know, I mean, well, this whole collection of poems is her processing her grief after her life partner died. She was a partner with Molly Malone Cook for over 40 years. And after Molly's death, like these were like the poems that poured out of her in her season of grief.
Gotcha.
And so again, I talked about grief earlier.
Yeah.
Like I really resonated with this particular. I mean, I love all of her books, volumes of poetry that I've read. I haven't read them all, but every time I open one up, I mean, it's just, my heart just cries yes, yes, yes to that. And this one is entitled Thirst, which I think was the title of this poem that we're going to talk about.
Yes.
And she is, so the first line of this alludes to her grief, right? Like the loss of her partner. So you want me to just read it?
Please.
I feel like that's the only
Yeah.
way, the only way to do this any justice.
I think that's the only way to do it. No, please do. I would love that. And I'll just be following along on my iPad.
So this is Thirst by Mary Oliver. Another morning, and I wake with thirst for the goodness I do not have. I walk out to the pond, and all the way God has given us such beautiful lessons. O Lord, I was never a quick scholar, but sulked and hunched over my books past the hour and the bell. Grant me, in your mercy, a little more time. Love for the earth and love for you are having such a long conversation in my heart. Who knows what will finally happen or where I will be sent? Yet already I have given a great many things away, expecting to be told to pack nothing, except the prayers, which, with this thirst, I am slowly learning.
That's absolutely beautiful. Man, I love that. So, okay, man, there's so much that I want to ask you about. Maybe we can kind of break it down, but I think I want to start with the question that I threw out there a moment ago before you read it, before you gave us that beautiful introduction to Mary Oliver. What do you think she means by thirst?
Well, I think in this case, it's a very real yearning. Like it's a grief. Like I think she's talking about when I wake with the thirst for the goodness I do not have. I think she's talking about like my partner is not next to me.
Mm,
And so this goodness I do not have, I think this is a poem about grief.
mm.
And yet this thirst, right? It's like she's yearning for it, right? Like it's something like I've tasted it before and I need another drink of it and I'm thirsty. I'm yearning for it. And so I think in this particular case, I think this is a grief, a yearning for her beloved.
Mm.
And so but in the outworking of her grief, like, you know, this very last line, she says, accept the prayers, which with this thirst, I am slowly learning. So what's interesting in this whole volume of poetry is like, she's like reconnecting to God in her grief journey
Mm.
as she's very, very profoundly grieving this life partner who's gone. And that is drawing her heart through to God. And she's seeing God. I mean, like she says, you know, I walk out to the pond and God's given us beautiful lessons. Like she's seeing God in the creation, like all around her. And that is allowing her the space to process her grief and to bring it to God and to engage with a God who loves her, even with all her questions. I mean, again, and by the way, she's just honest. That's the other thing I love about Mary Oliver,
Right.
is she's just honest about like, there's so much mystery to this life, to the spiritual life, to God. And she doesn't like pretend to have any answers. And that's what makes her so accessible, is because she's actually real.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's what, you know, she's wrestling even in this whole poem about like, look, I don't get all this. Like I'm a slow learner, but I feel like God is teaching me some things and showing me some things in and through my thirst, my grief, my yearning, and through my connection to the earth. And so like, I love that line, you know, love for the earth and love for you are having such a long conversation in my heart.
I love that line. I wanted to ask you about that.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's been my experience, right? Like every time I get outside, even in the city, right? Even in, you know, I live in Houston, like
Yeah.
we don't have mountains here,
Sadly.
but there's beauty right in the heart of the city. I mean, like a butterfly will zip by, or a pigeon, or like a dragonfly, and it will be a little flash of beauty that calls to my heart and opens me up, you know, again, right in the midst of the concrete jungle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I was talking with this about a client the other day. He'd been spending time just walking around, just downtown, you know, just kind of wrestling with his own battle with depression. And in a way that was very powerful, he had lately been struck by, and this was his language, the beauty of the faces of some of these homeless men that he had gotten to know. And he's not a religious person. I think he's seeking and trying to figure out what life's all about. But I don't think he had ever really spent much time around people in that state, you know, in that set of conditions. But he was reflecting on how they could experience a level of joy and just satisfaction with their situation in a way that he couldn't. And it was beautiful to him.
Yeah. And I mean, we have some pretty profound biblical images about, engaging someone. Like whenever you bring a
Mm.
cup of cold water to someone, like you've brought it to me, right? Well, in that transaction, for lack of a better word, like in that
Sure.
engagement, like the person being served is Jesus. Like that's where Jesus is showing up there, not in the server, right?
Yeah.
Not like you. So he's going down and meeting people on the street. He's meeting Jesus.
Mm.
Like this is the face of Jesus. And
That's
if
powerful.
he's offering them anything, like they're offering him Jesus.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, too many of us in helper roles, like we think that we're the one bringing God to the equation or to the relationship. And I think Jesus says clearly, no, the one being served is actually showing up as me.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I love that.
And so that's where mutuality is so vital in any of our relationships, whether it's therapeutic, pastoral, in our homes, right? Like there's mutuality is the key to anything, because we're gonna meet and encounter God in and through each other.
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I see things. That's beautiful, Paul. Yeah.
And we're going to encounter God in and through creation, which is kind of where we got, the Mary Oliver was taking us.
Sure.
And that's what my experience is with getting outside, which is why I love, everything from fishing to birding to just going on a hike, paddling, whatever I can do to get outside. I'm going to do it, and it's going to be good for my soul.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I couldn't agree more that we have this encounter with the divine, with the sacred when we're in nature. One thing I do wrestle with sometimes though is I think when a part of me reflects on doing that, it's always kind of this idyllic, there's sunshine and maybe mountains, or there's the grass, there's a beautiful placid lake. Do you think it's possible to encounter the sacred in nature in things like natural disasters or some of the things that we see, in the animal kingdom, like predation and the stuff that doesn't seem like Disney-fied?
Totally. Well, to speak to the predation, I remember somebody saying one time, anything eating something else is really cool. Like, I think predation is awesome, right? So, like, I remember, watching with my son when he was like 4 years old, and we saw this like yellow-crowned night heron catch a crawfish.
Oh my
and
gosh.
like, and it would like throw it up in the air, it would grab it by the claw, it would shake it, it would break the claw off, it would fall to the ground, he'd pick it up again, do the same thing. He broke the claws off, then ate the crawfish and ate the claws. And I mean, we were like 20 feet away just watching this in awe. I mean, it was awesome.
I was
right?
gonna say, like, I would be fascinated, like on the one hand, maybe terrified, but also fascinated by that.
Yeah. And
What a powerful experience.
yeah.
Man.
And so again, I mean, cycle of life, like, maybe predation can be bloody, right? If you're watching like a lion eat an impala or something, but it's also like profound and awesome. So I think it's great. But to go to your question about natural disasters, obviously those are not awesome. They're too often tragic. And that's the mystery, right? Like I'm not going to pretend to come with, some answers about that.
Sure.
I think that we wrestle with these things, and we wrestle to understand, what is the role of God in those things, and why do some people's homes flood and others don't? My street flooded up and drained 3 times.
Wow.
Right. And
During Harvey?
During Harvey, the water came up halfway to my house, and it drained all the way down, and it did that 3 times. Well, if it hadn't drained the first time, my house would have flooded. Right. But why is it that, 100,000 houses in Houston flood and mine didn't? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to like claim any kind of superiority or any kind of like, I didn't deserve that.
You've been living a holy life,
Right.
Paul, so
No,
that's why.
that's
No,
the
that's
whole
crazy,
point,
right?
And so many of my friends and my family members, their houses flooded. So how do we understand this? I'm not going to presume to wrap my mind around that, but I will say that even when tragedy strikes and when trauma strikes, like I think God grieves it with us. And I think God's like the first one on the scene, like coming alongside to offer love and care, often through other people. I mean, again, people have to show up and like help you muck out your house or help you heal from trauma or whatever it may be. I think that I see the hand of God in the healing process that happens, and in the ways that, our whole city came together after Harvey, right? In some profound ways.
Oh,
Neighbors
yeah.
that didn't even know each other, they're out there sharing food and, coming alongside and like mucking out houses of people, total strangers, right? Like we all just came together in some profound ways that couldn't have happened otherwise. And I'm not saying, please don't hear me say like God did that so we would all
Sure.
grow closer together. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I do think that God is laced in and through the healing and the transformation that comes out of those places of tragedy and trauma.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I wouldn't want to build a whole philosophy or theology around this statement, but I think going back to the natural disasters reality and the stuff in nature that seems so violent and just kind of scary, how that could be an encounter with the divine. At least for me lately, it's been an experience of the divine as other or just mysterious or just powerful in a way that maybe puts my ego in check a little bit. I go back to Rudolf Otto's idea of the holy as something that's both terrifying and something that draws you in and that pulls you in this beautiful way. But it's both, right? The sacred has an element to it that can't be put in a box or given an explanation or controlled.
Absolutely.
It's wild
It
in
is.
some ways, right?
And if it's not, then we're not talking about God.
Exactly.
Right. Like I refuse that. This is why I actually love mystery when it comes to that. Like when the questions come to me about why and the big picture questions that, by the way, people have been wrestling with for thousands of years. So like why any of us who presume we're going to solve it in this year after people have been dealing with this for 3,000. I mean, we read the scriptures, like this is a question that's been around for 3,000 years.
Yeah.
So but the mystery to me just actually points to the fact that, okay, we're not talking about something of a human creation. Like we actually are not the ones who can wrap our minds around this. Like we're actually the ones in awe of it. Like we're actually the ones, like in some ways submitting to it. And again, that's language many people won't like, but like this idea that we're not the creator, right? Like we're actually the creation. And I have no problem with that. Like I actually am comforted by that because, as we talk about the power and the awe of God, the wonder, there's also, I think, an intimacy. Like I actually believe that undergirding all of this is love, right? So I get that there's natural disasters and some really hard stuff and the news is awful all around us every day. I get that. But I also believe that like the truest thing about any of us is that we are loved.
Yeah, I love that.
So that
no pun intended.
Yeah, because that's the thing that can't be taken away by what I do. Like you could take my hands, my eyes, my legs, right? Like my circumstances could go to hell, but I do believe that in all of that, like I am actually loved. Like each of us in our deepest, innermost being, our actual identity is that we're beloved daughters and sons of God. To me, that's like who we are on an identity level. And that's actually how I make it through this world. Like that's how I can navigate the traumas that come up, the hard things, is because I actually trust and believe that undergirding all of that is love.
Yeah. One of the things I think about is I don't think you're talking about, a cheap, sappy, sentimental version of love that this is. I don't want to speak for you. How would you define love and the type of love that you are referring to when you're connecting it to the sacred, to the divine?
Now, that's a great question. I mean, I see it as a love that is committed through whatever comes, right? Like that's how I think of, for example, love with my wife.
Sure.
Right? Like this is, in sickness and in health, like through hell or high water, like we're staying together. And that's a love it's not about feelings. Like it's a lot deeper than that. It's a commitment. And so that's on a human level, like the closest I can come to that. Right. But it's also like a love for a parent, like a parent would have for a child. It's this sense of like, you could do a whole lot of awful stuff. And like, I'm with you. Like I'm like, and by the way, like I love you, not based on your performance, not based on what you do, what you have, whether you succeed or fail, or all these like human, I think those are all human constructs.
Sure.
But like, I love my children on a level that's like going to be there regardless of what comes. Right. And regardless of their behavior. I mean, again, like all of our kids, like they do stuff that we prefer they don't. And
that's to put it very lightly.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet like that doesn't reduce our love for them.
Right.
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 And in some ways, like, again, when you navigate hard things with your kids, like, it actually deepens your love for them. And so that to me, so to go back to your question,
Sure.
I mean, I had an experience many years ago now where I was wrestling with quite a lot of insecurities. And in particular, they were insecurities around what other people thought of me.
Okay.
Right. And as I was wrestling with that, and it's a long story that how I got to this experience, and it was actually through some group spiritual direction that we were a part of on this particular day. And in wrestling with those things, and the groups kind of sat and listened to the Spirit on my behalf. And then this really wise woman, she looked me in the eye and she said, when you know that you're a beloved son of God, you are free to make mistakes, and you're free for people to be mad at you, and you're free to take risks, and you're free to play. And she kept going on this list of things that I was free to do. And so, like, that statement, right? When you know you're a beloved son of God, you're free. That for me has been, and again, this is all like stuff that I knew in my head, but like, I had to have that moment to actually have it sink in on this level where I could really believe it, or like could be like
it's almost like you had to have that experience in your lived reality.
Absolutely. In order to, and by the way, like, I think I had to go on this identity journey. Like, that moment was a place where like all of this identity journey that I had been on kind of came together. And I realized, like, okay, my identity is not what other people think of me. My identity is actually that I'm a beloved son of God. And by the way, the other word that's key in that sentence is when, because I forget this all the time.
Yeah.
Like it's when I know that, then I'm free. But the thing is, I don't remember that all the time. And so I have to be reminded like 10 times a day that that's the truth.
Oh, sure.
And so I'll be thinking about it. Like, we'll have this awesome conversation. And then, half an hour from now, I'll be driving home and I will have forgotten all about this, and I'll be caught up in my stress of today.
Sure.
And the things I have to do next. And it's like, I have to be reminded, and so I feel like that's where, and very often this is where, again, creation comes into play. Like, this is for me, like where pigeons and butterflies and these like little flashes of beauty will remind me that I am loved, right? They will remind me of my deep identity, and I'll go, okay, like, even with whatever I'm wrestling with, whatever the stress of the day is, or that, challenging thing that I'm walking through, like, when I'm grounded on that love, like, I can make it through.
I love it, man. One of the reasons I enjoy poetry so much is that it's a little reminder to me of the truth of some of these things. Just like you said, you have to be reminded of the truth of your identity. I love poetry so much because it's a very creative and beautiful medium that helps remind me of the truth of myself, the truth of others, the truth of this, thing that we call existence on this planet.
Yeah.
In light of that, if I can, I'd like to read another poem from this collection. I think it's called Praying. And I wanted to see what you thought about it. So,
dude, I'm laughing because I read that one last night. I'm like, man, we got to read this one on the podcast.
It's a good one. So she says, it doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be weeds in a vacant lot or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks and a silence in which another voice may speak. I just love that poem. So when you hear those words, when you were rereading it last night, what strikes you about it?
Well, what strikes me is, like, we could do a whole podcast of just reading Mary Oliver and like keeping our own traps shut, because like she's way more profound than we can be.
Agreed, 150,000%.
But yeah, I mean, this is just such a profound moment, right? Like, she's saying, like, it doesn't even have to be the beautiful flower. It could be some weeds in a vacant lot. I mean, what do we say? The concrete jungle. Like, the beauty is all around us.
It's the face of the homeless person.
Yeah. And it's everywhere. And if we just pay attention, like, just pay attention. And then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. Like, this isn't a contest, but it's a doorway into gratitude, into thanks, and a silence in which another voice may speak. And that's what, to go back to like spiritual direction,
sure,
like, that's what we're talking about, is this paying attention and this invitation to encounter the divine. And again, it can happen in the concrete jungle. It can happen in the vacant lot. It can happen with the blue iris. I mean, that's going to catch your attention probably more than the weeds. But I mean, I had this happen to me on the freeway a few months back. I stopped, like the traffic backed up, and that's always like stressful, right? You're like trying to move, but
especially if you live in Houston.
Right. Well, it happens a lot in Houston, but it's always like you're trying to get somewhere and the traffic stops. And I look over to my left, and right there in the concrete was this like flowering vine.
Oh man.
With like purple flowers. And I was able to I was stopped enough on the freeway. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of it. And it was like,
I love it.
This is it. This is what Mary Oliver's talking about. And it was this reminder, like stuck in traffic, that like, Paul, you're loved. Like there is beauty here, even in this moment, right? In the course of the city. Like love is here, like beauty is here.
Oh, I love that. Just to make a couple connections, I think I might have shared this story on a previous episode. I interviewed a therapist that's like a nature therapist, an ecotherapist, and I guess I like to think about the divine and the sacred, in sort of these darker ways, or these ways that maybe aren't always as positive. And from some of my thinking and studying on like something like Stoicism, which I think is also present in various aspects of Christianity, there's this idea of memento mori, or being mindful of death, of not running away from our decay and just our finite existence. And I remember just going for a jog. I try to run in the mornings, and there was a squirrel right in front of me that had died, probably gotten run over by a car. And, almost intuitively, instinctually, I wanted to turn away because I don't want to look at something that's died. But there was this part of me that's like, no, just linger with that image. Just look at it for a little bit, not as a morbid thing, but just as a way to be in contact with that side of nature, with that side of the sacred, that even death is a piece of what we're experiencing here on earth. And so I guess I can't agree more with Mary Oliver that the point is to maybe slow down and just pay attention and fall into some kind of silence so that we can be in a greater connection with the sacred.
Yeah. And silence holds space, right? And for me, my encounters with God often come in spaciousness, right? Like I've got to have some margin, like for me to actually be able to hear and listen. And I've also got to be quiet, right? Like that's where, I've been doing a lot of centering prayer in my daily routine for a while now. And that centering prayer is like, it's a silent prayer. Like I'm not saying any words. I'm actually trying to like release the words and like rid the words, because I'm actually just holding space for the Spirit of God to do something to me that's not about words. And I can't even consciously wrap my mind around it, But so that, I think that silence is a crucial part of encountering the divine. And so holding space is another kind of thing. And so to go back to the squirrel though, on the road, like, certainly death is part of the rhythm of life. Right. And I'm not, I don't want to belittle death, because it's really scary, I think, for all of us. And certainly for those who are bereaved, like it's very present. But I'm also like not afraid of death in a way that like, and frankly, I feel informed by my faith for that. And so that's where like my faith, and yet like the squirrel, like that's again, cycle of life, right? Like if I don't know, I don't think that squirrel's going to get wasted, right? Like probably what's going to come along, like a vulture's going to fly in and get his share.
I love that.
And then the ants are going to pick the bones dry. Like this is assuming somebody doesn't just throw it in the trash, right? Hopefully a fly tire gets in there and gets the tail before it goes this way. But like
I love that, Paul. That's so good.
There is a like even for example, to go back to fishing, right? Like I practice catch and release most of the time. I will keep a fish occasionally to eat, but even if we, I've heard people on fishing podcasts, which is most of what I listen to.
Okay.
People will wrestle with this idea of like, oh, I caught this fish and then it went belly up or something. It died when I tried to release it. Like they're wrestling with like the ethics of that. And, I've heard people say, well, the ospreys need to eat too, right? Like the turtles need to eat too.
That's good.
Like this fish is not wasted. I mean, again, none of us want like the fish we're releasing to die. But I mean, I've had friends, they're fishing offshore and they release a fish and a shark just comes up and pounds it. And it's like, oh man, that stinks. Well, I mean, sharks need to eat too. There's, again, we go back to like we were talking about earlier with the gazelles and the lions and stuff. I mean, there's like predation, like this is part of the cycle of life.
Yes.
And I think there's beauty in that, right? Like I
I
really
think
hold a very
I think there's beauty in that.
seasonal, I hold a very seasonal image of life. And I mean, to me, seasons are really profound, like winter, spring, summer, fall. And some of them are much shorter, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or morning, evening, noon, like our cycles, like we have little seasons going all the time. And some of them are much bigger seasons. And then we have seasons that are much longer or more extended. But
I like that.
So I use images of seasons in the spiritual journey, in I think grief is a seasonal journey. And I could chase that rabbit for days. But I think death is just part of like the cycle of life in some ways.
Sure.
And I don't mean that to belittle our life, but actually, because I don't believe that death is the end of us, like I'm not afraid of that, but it's profound. And by the way, like I do think a lot of our human struggles, challenges are part of our like running from death, right? Or trying to delay it or trying to, put it off at all costs, that kind of thing. I mean, I think so much of our human challenge and conflict and everything else like comes out of that struggle.
Absolutely.
Whereas like what does it look like to befriend death? Like have you ever read Tuesdays with Morrie?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that book is so profound. And it's a picture of this guy dying well. Wow. And I would just encourage, 5 stars, like everybody should read Tuesdays with Morrie because it's this guy's dying. I mean, he's got terminal illness. And this other guy comes alongside him and visits him every Tuesday until, kind of through the last season of his life. And it's so profound and beautiful because Morrie is like, he's not afraid of it. Like he actually has like befriended death and he's dying well and he's putting all his relationships in order. And like, it is such a beautiful, profound picture of what it looks like, a totally alternative vision of like facing death.
Yeah.
And so,
geez, I love that. Okay, I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah. It's a great book.
I know over the years I've heard about it. I think they maybe even made it into a movie or a TV series.
Could be.
Okay. But I'll have to start with the book. Those are usually better.
Yeah. I remember reading it in seminary and it was part of a class that I hated that class, but the best thing about the class was the books. It was one of the books that was assigned for that class.
Nice. Okay. So I know, man, I could talk about Mary Oliver and poetry all day long. I know at some level, I did want to kind of jump into just how you think about fly fishing. And I'm not even sure how to ask it from a religious point of view. I don't think that's quite right. I know we kind of read this article together from, I think his name is Samuel Snyder. It's religion and fly fishing. I could take us down different paths in terms of different questions, but maybe I'll just start by asking, what is the relationship between how you understand your faith and your passion for fly fishing? And maybe we can kind of see where that goes.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, that article that you alluded to, you sent it to me like 5 months ago, and I read it right when you sent it.
Okay.
And and it's been a while. So I didn't refresh on it.
And I only read it this week. So
that's hilarious. So we may leave that one off to the side. Well, but in terms of my passion for it, I mean, so my journey has been that, as a kid, like I went fishing with my grandfather, and it just some of my most beautiful childhood memories. Like I just
was it fly fishing?
No, not
okay.
yet. I mean, most of us are going to start off with like a bobber and a worm, and that was certainly my experience too. And but the same grandfather. I mean, so I loved fishing as a kid, and I didn't get to do it as often as I would have liked. I went a little bit with an uncle, but I would visit my grandfather in the summer. He lived in Nebraska, and he would take us up. My grandparents would take us up to either Minnesota, or we'd fish in Nebraska, or we'd go out to Wyoming. And some of those summer experiences fishing with my grandfather were just really, yeah, just some core childhood memory. I mean, it was just fun. And I just had, and so even as a kid though, I would get like the Bass Pro Shops catalog and I would just read it like cover to cover. And,
Nice.
and so it was like filling my brain,
Mm.
and it was a fun thing that I loved to do, but I didn't get to do it as often as I would like, which is still true of my life today. So then probably in high school age, we find, so my grandfather took us out to Wyoming, and the first time we went out there, he taught us how to fish with like a cane pole and worms to catch these trout in these little streams. And then the next time we were a little older, we went out there and he taught us to fly fish. And so like while we were doing that, he would fly fish. And I remember seeing him do it. And then he taught us how to do it. And I just loved it, and I did a little bit more kind of in those high school years, a little bit in college. And then, after college, got married, moved to Houston, a long way from any trout. And kind of went through a pretty extended season of not fishing very much at all. And just life was full, all kinds of other commitments. But I always loved it. Right. And a few years back now, I just kind of rekindled that passion. And at one point, do you know who Dan Allender is?
Yeah.
So Dan Allender, I was doing some training up in Seattle with the Allender Center. And at one point I heard him say, he said, fly fishing saved my life.
Wow.
He's talking about himself. And when he said that, it felt like permission. It felt like this invitation back to that and really to self-care, right? Because that's what he's talking about. I mean, he's a psychologist. He's sitting with people with trauma all the time. And for him, like fly fishing is part of his self-care. Well, it since then, and that was several years ago at this point, but it's kind of become my self-care. Like again, as a caregiver, as somebody who sits with people in crisis and in grief, like I've got to take care of myself.
Sure.
And I realized in recent years, like my self-care is not selfish, right? It's actually vital to even getting to function in a healthy way myself.
Yes.
And so if you really ask me, Paul, what do you want to do? You got a free day. What do you want to do? I'm like, if I'm being honest, I want to go fishing. Like that's what I want to do. And so there's this connection with creation. Like there's this, and literally like in the tug of a fish, right? Like there's a connection, like there's this connection, like life on life, like you're wrestling with this thing. And, it depends on the size of the fish, whether it's big or small, but it kind of doesn't matter. Like, and in fishing worlds, they'll say like the tug is the drug, right? Like,
I like that.
There's this connectedness to like another life, to creation, to the beauty. And then it fills me with gratitude. Like when I'm fishing, for one thing, it helps me be really present in the moment, right? So it's like this invitation to be fully present, to be right there. Like I'm not thinking about anything else. Like it's this, and then there's gratitude. Like if I actually catch a fish, which again, I'm well acquainted with not catching fish, but occasionally it'll happen. And when it happens, like there's gratitude. There's gratitude to the fish itself. There's gratitude to God. There's gratitude to whatever friend like told me about that place to go. There's gratitude to, somebody who told me to use that fly or that lure or whatever I'm using. And like, it just wells up in me, these beautiful things. And there's also, oh man, I totally forgot what I was going to say.
I hate when that happens.
I hate when that happens.
But I bet it's going to come back. So, okay. So let me ask you this question: as you're talking, I'm wanting to maybe, go back to a previous comment you made where you talked about just being enthralled with the mystery, and that's one of the themes that the article gets into a little bit is fly fishing as an encounter with a type of mystery or with an unknown, with elements that aren't in your control. Could you maybe speak to that if that resonates with your experience at all?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real, fly fishing in particular, as opposed to other types of fishing,
Right.
which I'll do any type of fishing.
Okay.
Like put a rod in my hands, I'm happy. But I have gravitated toward fly fishing a little more recently because there's a real aesthetic to it. There's like a beauty to it. There's a finesse to it. It is more challenging, right? So it's self-limiting in some ways.
Sure.
I mean, you can go out with live bait and catch a hell of a lot more fish than I'm going to catch with a fly rod.
Right.
But but there's so much more satisfaction in actually
Mm.
catching a fish on a fly rod. And there's certain situations where a fly rod is actually the most effective way to fish, but that's going to be rare. But so that aesthetic is certainly a key part of the experience. But to go to your question about mystery, it has struck me that like fishing is every cast is an act of hope, right? Like it's an embodied hope. Like you don't throw your lure or your fly out unless you think you might catch something, right? Like you're not going to go throw it in a rain puddle,
Right.
But like if there might be fish there, and that's a lot of times the mystery. Now sometimes you can see the fish, and that's the best when you're sight casting, but that's rare. And but there's this, so the mystery is kind of like maybe there's a fish there, right? Like am I reading this situation right? Like there's the current seam, the fish might be, I think I know where a fish might be sitting. Let me see if I can put my fly in a place that it drifts down to where a fish should be. And when that connects, right now you've connected to the mystery. Like you've connected,
I love that.
you've put the pieces together. And there's a real satisfaction in using the right fly, drifting it just right and getting a connection to a fish. I mean, there's a satisfaction in just like putting the pieces together and getting a fish to eat, right? Like you fooled this thing, and I understand they've got pretty small brains, but like you've made this, you put all the pieces together. You have the mystery is often when you can't see fish, and yet you're casting out hope, like to this unknown thing to see.
I think that's such a powerful
connect.
metaphor. I love that.
And and it's also, I mean, it's really embodied, like it's participatory, right? Like my grandfather would always tell me, like, you can't catch fish unless your line's in the water, right? Like if you just out in the boat and your rod's, if your line's not in the water, you're not catching fish. I mean, you have to participate in the mystery in order to connect, right?
Man, I'm so glad you're bringing up this concept of embodiment. I know this could be a whole different episode, but just recently, for very personal reasons and just thinking about my own therapeutic approach and wanting to learn more about different sort of strategies, I've been thinking about the importance of just embodiment, especially embodiment for men, because I think this is one of the things that happens with whether we call it toxic masculinity or rigid masculinity. I think we're often disconnected from our bodies. And I'm reading this phenomenal book by someone named Hillary McBride, who's amazing. I can't recommend this book enough for anyone out there. I think it's called The Wisdom of the Body. And I think I even saw that your church did a series on just embodiment or the body. And I guess to tie it all together, I wondered how embodiment plays into the experience of fly fishing from your perspective.
Yeah, great question. I know my wife loves that book.
Okay.
I have yet to read it myself, but
it's good.
I have told other people about it.
Yeah. No, I've done that before. Recommended a book that I never read.
Again, and my wife has read it, so this is not blind. But yeah, and my wife's a big fan of Hillary McBride, and she's really solid. I do think, I mean, and honestly, part of my own journey has been about getting connected to my body.
Got you.
And honoring my body, like validating that like what my body needs is goodness, right? And care, like wearing good socks. Like you see these.
Yeah, no, I've been staring at them. They look very comfortable.
Like, these are like wool socks. And I remember the day that I was. So can I just tell the backstory of all this?
Please.
So I was up at the Allender Center in Seattle, and this is a really long story. I won't tell all of it, but there was they did this moment where they asked us to check in with our bodies, and we started with our feet. So we put our feet flat on the floor, and they were like, "How are your feet today?" And I kind of felt in my shoes, and I was like, "Oh, I'm wearing my good socks," and my feet were really comfortable, and I realized. So I had these pretty, some nice wool socks, but I only ever wore them, Kike, when I was traveling. Like I saved these socks and I was up in Seattle, and so I had traveled up there, and I had brought the good socks, and I realized that day I was like, I should wear good socks more often.
I like that. And
I went out and I got like a drawer full of good socks, and now every day, like I put on good socks, and it's a really simple everyday thing, but like it is before this, I was like cheap white cotton sock guy. And like, not only did they look horrible, they also felt horrible. Like they're thin and they don't treat your feet well. And now I got like my merino wool socks and my feet feel good every day. And by the way, like I got to take care of my feet. If I'm on my feet all day,
Absolutely.
like if my knees and my feet go out, then I'm done. Right.
Yeah.
But when I take care of my feet, like my whole body's good.
I love that.
And by the way, like for me to like get to the point of believing that I was worthy of that, like I didn't need to wear just like the cheapest socks I could get. Like I tend to be a cheapskate, in particular with self-care. And if you know anything about the Enneagram,
Sure.
like,
What number are you?
I'm an Enneagram 2. And,
Okay.
And as a 2, like we tend to be cheapskates, especially around the areas of self-care. Right. So for me to just acknowledge like, no, I'm actually worthy of expensive socks, like good socks and good shoes and like taking care of my body. And by the way, the later lesson was like, I'm actually worthy of investing in my fishing gear, right? Like, and granted, I have to save some money for it because I can't just spend money I don't have, but like,
Sure.
But like actually in saying, no, I can get some good stuff and I can save up some money and get a nice fly rod that I can use for decades and pass on to my kids. And like, I'm actually worthy of that. Right. And I don't need to just go find the cheapest fly rod I can find out there. Like I can actually get a decent one. And so those have been like some self-care things that have been really embodied, you know? And
yeah, I love that.
And so to go, yeah, I mean, and fly fishing is embodied. I mean, you know, you're literally like, you're getting to do it. Like this isn't spectator, you know, I do listen to a bunch of fishing podcasts, but that's
Okay.
what I do when I can't go fishing. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a way to think about fishing.
To get you pumped up.
Yeah. To get me pumped up. But a better thing is to go fishing, right? Like to actually do it, to embody it, to step into the moment and get out there, right? And do it.
I love it. Do you find that the little that I do know about fly fishing, I feel like there's certain postures and rhythms and even the way that one casts that requires almost a certain choreography or just a way that you move your body. Is that, does that resonate at all with you? Is that a part of the experience?
Yeah. I mean, the casting is, yeah, it's rhythmical and it's, like I said, there's an aesthetic beauty to it. Right. And if you've seen like A River Runs Through It with Brad Pitt,
You know, I haven't. In the article, it mentioned it several times. Like, man, I got to watch that.
well, it's a great movie.
Okay.
But what's funny is like the casting that guy does in that movie it's not realistic casting.
It's not
That's
realistic.
like Hollywood.
Okay.
It's Hollywood casting. But I mean, aesthetically, it's a gorgeous film. It's really profound. It's you know, relationally moving. It's a great book as well. And
Okay. I didn't realize it was a book as well.
yeah, the movie's based on a book. That's really awesome. But anyway, and within the fly fishing world, like that movie came out in the 1990s. And by the way, like it has to be said, I was into fly fishing before the movie came out.
Got you. So the movie didn't get you into it.
No, it didn't. Because like literally the fly fishing industry is like before the movie and after the movie. Because that movie got like hundreds of thousands of people into fly fishing. And the industry has, you know, it's still a niche, small industry, but it has like extrapolated, boomed since then. Right. And then COVID on top of that, like it's even grown even bigger because people had to, what were they going to do? They couldn't do the normal thing. So they all got outside and they all get into fishing. Which again, it's good for the industry. That's all well and good, but
sure.
So yeah, that movie is definitely like kind of a seminal turning point within fly fishing culture in the United States. But I remember seeing it in college and just absolutely loving that movie. But so there is an aesthetic to go back to your actual question. Yeah, there's a rhythm to it. And I mean, just to, you know, speak to the difference between like fly fishing and conventional fishing. Like with conventional fishing, you have like a heavy lure on the end of a thin line, and you in your cast, you swing it out there, and the lure is pulling the line out.
Right.
So if you've ever gone fishing, that's probably what you've done. Fly fishing is the opposite. You have like a light fly or light lure, and the line. So in order to deliver this light fly, you actually need a heavy line to carry it out there. So you're basically throwing a loop of line that's unfurling, and then it's got a leader on the end, like a thin line that's got the fly on the end of that, and you're rolling it out and delivering it to the fish. So you've got to use the rod to kind of throw loops sort of forward and back. You usually have to go behind you in order to go forward.
Okay.
That's kind of a conventional cast. There's all sorts of other casts that you can do as you get into the nuances of it. But those are the basics. So there's a certain timing, right? Like you've got to like pop to a stop. And if you go too far one way, you're going to just thwap the ground. And if you go the other way, like, so I mean, it takes practice. I mean, you can't just go out and do it without any training or without like a lesson or two, or getting a friend to help you kind of thing.
Okay, got you. Now, I know even how we got reconnected was me finding your Instagram where you highlight the different flies that I don't know how to say it, creating, tying, constructing. And I was hoping you could speak to that, whatever comes to mind, because they're quite beautiful, these things that you're creating. And maybe you could reflect on how that connects to your sense of religion or spirituality or your identity. If there's something kind of deeper there in your activity creating these flies.
Well, that has been another layer to this whole journey.
Okay.
Has been the adding the fly tying to the fly fishing. And it's become, I've just been into it for a couple of years now, and it's become like a really creative pursuit. And tying would be the right verb, right? Like you're literally like taking a bear hook and you're tying on whatever materials you're using, feathers, fur, various things to kind of create each different fly. And there is, I mean, they are beautiful, right? And there's certainly people a lot more talented than me who have gone before, right? Like I'm just, I'm kind of a hack, but there's some cool stuff that comes out. And so I appreciate your encouragement.
Yeah, no, they're amazing.
I just can think of all the other Instagram, channels I watch that are so much farther beyond me. But yeah, there is, I mean, I think as human beings, like I do believe we are creative beings. Like we're actually made in the image of a creator God, like the one who's made us has made us to create, and we get to co-create. Like I think that's part of our role on this earth. And so there is and again, it's not something that I've done enough of until recently,
Okay.
So the poetry's been a little bit of that. And actually haven't written much poetry in recent years because I've been into fishing and I've been tying flies. So, but it has been my creative pursuit, at least for the last couple of years. And it's just been it's made me a better fisherman for sure, because I have.
Yeah. How so?
Well, just figuring out like what do the fish want to eat, and how do you make that? And it's mostly imitation. Oh, this guy tied that fly. Let me watch his YouTube video and figure out how he did that. Sure. And then tie that. And then you get to the point where you start to create your own new things, or you make variations off of a theme, and you get to create something new yourself. And so that, I mean, that whole thing is just, it's life-giving, like just for lack of a better, I mean, I think it's, and then even putting it on Instagram is like, all right, this is cool for me, but like, I want to share this. Like I want to put it out to the world. So I had like a private Instagram
Absolutely.
account, but then it's like, no, I can't share them on there and have everyone see it. So, and it has actually built community, right? Like, so putting it out there and, you found me. The reason we're having this conversation is because of that, right? I had another friend who I sent in a question to the Orvis Fly Fishing Podcast, which is probably the best fishing podcast out there.
Okay.
And a friend of mine that I hadn't talked to in like 20 years, he heard me ask the question on that podcast, and he looked me up and he found me, and then we reconnected.
Oh, that's so cool.
And we've even got to go fishing together.
Wow.
And he's actually one of my inspirations with respect to flying. So shout out to Drew Day at _day_fly_3 But his, I mean, if you think my stuff is beautiful, like you should check
him out.
His
Okay.
Instagram, because anyway, he's a brilliant tyer, but he's a good friend, and we reconnected just through that medium. But
I love that.
But so there is this sense of community, right? And that's the other thing I would say as far as fishing is like, we all joke about like fishing stories, right? And like how, fishermen always exaggerate and all this stuff. But there is this importance of like telling the story of the catch. That is like it's actually like an important piece of the whole experience. So whether it's, putting on Instagram, or whether it's actually sitting around with a friend and having a drink and like getting to tell the story, I will often, like, if I've gone fishing for the day, I'll jump in my car, and that's when I call my brother he lives in Wyoming. And it's like, I got to call and if he has time and he can answer, it's like, man, I'm driving back from fishing. Let me tell you what happened, you know? And like there's this, and actually this author I love named James Kilgo, he writes about, this idea of a song feast, and it comes out of
Ooh, I
like
like
a
that.
First Peoples tradition. Like, you know, and this book was written in the 90s, so he calls them Eskimos, but like this tradition of like the hunters would, as a way of honoring the animal that they've killed,
Mm.
they would sit around the campfire and they would sing the song of the hunt, right? And so he tells a story in this awesome book called Deep Enough for Ivory Bills, and it's all about hunting and fishing and kind of the relationships of men that form in these hunting clubs and in these fishing clubs, and how they get together and they just tell their stories. And this song feast idea, to me, I'm like, that's what I'm actually doing on Instagram. I mean, it's a much
Wow.
shallower version of it, but it's
Great.
this invitation into saying like, tell the story of that fish that you caught, you know, because I think as anglers, as fishermen, like a part of it for me is that communal connection that
Mm.
I'm also yearning for, right? Like I'm
Sure.
yearning for like a good fishing buddy, right? And there's friends that I, you know, when I see them, what do we talk about? We talk about fishing, you know, and like we connect over that in some ways that's really profound. But and you know, certainly my brother and I have a relationship that's much deeper than that, but he's one of those people that I can call and it's like, oh, tell me about that catch, or, you know, sending each other pictures and stuff like that. So, I think the storytelling aspect of it is a crucial kind of communal piece of this whole fly fishing endeavor.
I love that. And that's such an important facet of what it means to be human, different religions across time, narrative and story, different texts, sharing that with others has been such a crucial component. So, gosh, that's a great connection. I guess, but before we sign off, is there anything else from your own life, from your experience with religion, with fly fishing, that you would want to share, that you'd want to just throw out there to any of the listeners?
Well, it's funny in talking about the fishing thing, like a lesson I've learned. I talked about how, you know, living in Houston, we're a long way from any trout, right? And that's my heart
Yeah.
would ultimately be fly fishing for trout, like on a mountain stream somewhere.
Okay.
But we don't have very many trout anywhere near here. So I finally learned after living in Houston for like 20 years, like if you can't fish the one you love, fish the one you're with. And
Oh,
so that's where I've started fishing for like the local stuff. And I've actually started, you know, saltwater fishing and fishing for, you know, carp and bass and like the closer fish that are actually right here. And when I can go fish for trout, that's awesome. But that idea that like, no, just be where you're planted, you know, like, okay, so maybe you can't do your, you know, again, I can't go trout fishing nearly as much as I would like. And when I get to, it's always a deep joy. But like I can still do it here, you know. I can go carp fishing in the bayou, in the concrete jungle of the bayou.
man, I love it.
And those things are actually harder to catch than trout, you know.
Really?
And like I still have yet to catch a carp in Houston in the bayou. Like I've tried many times, but I still haven't caught one. I mean, those things are actually pretty finicky. So like the
So, like, bloom where you're
bloom
planted.
where you're planted. Yeah, like don't give up on so I think this is what I'm saying. Like don't give up on the dream just because it's not like you can't. So for years I didn't actually fly fish because I thought I was so far from the fish, right? And it's like, no, I can do it like here. And I don't need to fly to the mountains to go do it, you know?
I love it.
So I don't know. That's one little thing that I've been, but that's been part of my self-care
Sure,
has been
sure.
just getting into it here.
I feel like that has a lot of connections in different aspects of life. You know, as you were talking, I guess one of the questions I have for you is, I guess when it comes to fly fishing and maybe just fishing in general, I've heard from some, of course, the goal, if I could put it that way, is to catch a fish. But so many people describe just the process or the act of fishing as enjoyable in and of itself. Not that there aren't frustrations when you don't catch anything, but I wonder if there's something there of spiritual or religious value that just doing it, being present, I hesitate to say going through the motions because that has negative connotations, but I think there is something to just embodied practice and different movements that in and of themselves are valuable. regardless of what the outcome is. Does that resonate with you at all?
It definitely does because again, I'm well acquainted with not catching fish. Um,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, every day out, whether or not I catch fish is a good day. So, without question. I mean, because
Do you have
ultimately,
to like get into a certain mindset to kind of ensure that that's the perspective that you take?
yeah, because again, it's like how do we measure ourselves, right? Like,
Mm,
am I measuring myself based on like the number of fish I catch, or am I measuring myself based on like the number of cool pictures I can put on Instagram?
right.
Is it about that, or is it actually about connecting to creation, connecting to myself, like saying, in some ways, saying yes to myself to say, no,
Mm,
no, you can take this time to go fishing. Sure, there's other stuff other responsibilities to do, but like it's okay to say yes to what you actually want to go do, which is to go fishing. And so that act in of itself is important for my soul and my body. And then, yeah, like if I catch fish, that's gravy. Like that's a bonus. That's the icing on top.
I
Now, I
like
would
it.
I would say that cake is a vehicle for icing. So the icing on top is pretty important, right? Like
Sure.
if I never caught fish, I probably would give this up.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
but
fair.
but but
Fair.
you know, but again, I talk about having not caught any carp in the bayous of Houston. I mean, I've tried a number of times and been unsuccessful, but each of those endeavors, like I've learned something, So like if you just have this growth mindset, if you have this like mindset that's like, okay, this is not about comparing myself with others, right? It's not about that.
Mm.
It's not about and again, this is so easy to say on the
It
couch on a podcast because when I'm in the stream, right? Like
right.
and if there's another fisherman, I mean, I had this experience last summer. I was in Utah and it was like I was having a rough day. I was fishing this river and I wasn't catching anything. And then here comes this guy along the bank, right? And I could just feel like the shame setting in,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because I was like, here, all of a sudden now there's an audience, and it's like, oh, because again, I can very easily slip back into like
What a
what do other people
masculine
think?
moment though with
Right.
performance.
Yeah. And so I could feel just this like, oh, and by the way, then I caught a fish like while that guy was like within eye shot. And I was like, yes, like, okay,
Yes, I'm a man.
now I'm a man. Now, now I'm validated. Like I'm worthy of being in this stream, but like, so we definitely have those moments, right? Like we can wrestle with all the human stuff on the stream just as much as we can, in our cars or in our relationships, in our houses, like
Sure.
we go with us when we go, we go to the stream. And yet, I mean, another perfect example of like, so that was an example of, a shame moment, but I went fishing a month or so ago and half an hour in, I broke my fly rod
Mm.
and I was totally okay. Like I happened to have a second rod in the car, so that helped, right? I had actually driven out to the Guadalupe River. Woke up at 3 a.m., drove 3 hours out because those are the closest trout to Houston. But I had the day to do it, and I was fishing, but I broke my fly rod, and I could have been like just been like devastated. I could have been really destroyed, but I just felt really grounded and centered. It was like, you know what, that happened. Let's go back to the car, get the other rod, get a drink of water,
Mm.
reset myself. I was actually able to like pull off a layer, like kind of reset for the day and go back and fish. And I ended up like moving on and catching some fish that day. And it
Nice.
turned into a great day, even though I broke my fly rod. And so, but there was this sense of like centeredness and groundedness that I was able to have in that moment that I don't know, like I was able to kind of face the adversity of breaking that rod, in a way that like just felt, I don't know if this makes it felt life-giving.
Absolutely.
Does
No.
that make sense?
So
And it was actually the struggle, the challenge of all of that gave me that moment.
yes, I think of two things. I have this quote on my wall. This comes from Marcus Aurelius: "The obstacle is the way," which is just a way of saying that it's in the hardship and the struggle that you actually find kind of the value and the purpose. But even deeper than that, I tell people if I'm interested in spirituality or religion these days at all, it's not as an answer to all these questions or a magical solution to these problems. It's now a framework or a path that helps provide some type of meaning or significance for my life, and that includes the darkness, that includes pain, that includes hardships, that includes situations I wouldn't choose but that I get thrown into to help me grow and expand my soul. And help me develop as a person. So that's kind of what I'm getting out of what you were saying. If that resonates with you.
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that the reality is like we all know that we have those experiences,
Sure.
right? Like we can't just fake it and pretend like our life is perfect.
I,
I mean,
I sure can't.
too often that is what Instagram's for, is faking it and you know,
Yes,
putting on this
yes.
public facing, you know,
100%.
everything is great. But when we can be real and we can be vulnerable and we can actually engage that darkness, those challenges, right? Like, and we find, hey, we those are the those are the places we grow, right? Like
Those are the places we
like
grow.
our pastor will say, like, you know, nobody ever became a better person by eating chocolate cake, right? Like you
Truth.
actually grow through the hard stuff, the challenges. And like, that's when we actually mature. That's when we become, we find out like what we're made of. We find out our strength. We actually are deepened in those things, you know? And the other line that when you say, what do I want to share with people? The other, like my favorite phrase, it comes from this little Catholic prayer book, and it's just always we begin again. And I just come back to that over and over. You know, it was like with the fly rod. It's like, well, always we begin again. I got another fly rod in the car. Let's go get that one. You know, it's like just a chance to begin again. And it's kind of like that. I mean, because with fly fishing, like you end up invariably like hook your fly in the trees and you break it off and you have to just retie and you know, so you go through a lot of flies in the course of a day, average fly fishing. And you just kind of have to be, it's just part of it, right? Like you have to be willing to like deal with the frustrations, the tangles,
I love it.
like all of those things that come and just always we begin again.
See, and to me, that speaks to just having a mindset of a student, humility, being open to the fact that you don't have it all together. Always begin again. I'm going to let that seep in because I think I try, not perfectly by any means. I try to live that out as a human, as a father, as a husband, as a therapist.
Yeah.
So
and
good.
and I think it's true in our relationships with ourselves, with God, with our family members. Like, you know, I mean, the only way my wife and I made it 25 years is always we begin again. Right.
No, that's good.
Like we have to, you know, we walk through hard stuff and we have to just begin again and begin again and begin again.
What a powerful way to describe grace too, I think.
Yeah. And that to me is it, you know, it is that. And again, it's this idea, like I said before, like when I know that I'm loved, you know, then I get to begin again.
Yeah.
And I have to be reminded of that. Like we're forgetful people. We have to be reminded, like, do this in remembrance of me. This is why we do communion every week at our church, is because we have to tell the story and be reminded of that we're loved, of grace, of the chance to begin again, of forgiveness and love on our behalf. Like we have to tell that story over there because we forget. And so there's no like shame in the forgetting, right? There's no,
That's
like,
beautiful.
we don't need to shame ourselves for forgetting. We actually just, when we remember, we go, oh yeah, we begin again. I had this spiritual director and teacher recently said, the returning is the practice, right? He talked about in centering prayer, like you have this centering word and you invariably get distracted like right away.
Sure.
But then you come back to your centering word and the centering, the recentering, the returning is the practice.
Oh yeah.
Like that's it. So we come back to the divine, we come back to the love, we come back to ourselves and this reminder of who we are. Like we have to do that 10 times a day, right? Like there's no shame in like forgetting. It's just like, no, when you remember, you just come back and you get to begin again.
Okay. So Paul, will you end with the line of the conversation or the line of the podcast, which is just saying, continue the conversation?
I am honored, Kike. I will just, can I say one more thing?
Please.
Before I say that. So I've really enjoyed your podcast and you're very prolific. You're cranking out way more episodes than I can actually keep up with because I've got my fishing podcast to listen to. But I love in particular, like what you do with the music and the podcast and how I feel like the music holds space.
Yeah.
And it settles me down, like just even taking a breath. Oh, we got a friend.
Yes, we got a pug that's going to join us.
The pug's going to join us. Anyway, so I'm grateful for this podcast and I'm honored to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Paul.